Who are some women that often get overlooked in history but had major contributions to society? Sandra Ford, the drug technician who first brought attention to what would become the AIDS epidemic. She knew something was up when she began receiving unusually high numbers of requests for pentamidine, an antibiotic reserved for treating pneumocystis pneumonia in seriously ill, immunocompromised patients. The patients it was being requested for were gay men who had been otherwise healthy. Oh, and also back then it was called GRID, not AIDS. It stood for gay-related immunodeficiency, whereas AIDS stands for acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. The more you know. And it was so ducking awful how the whole thing was handled. Seriously depressing. But, for a laugh, we can remember the giant condom placed over Jesse Helms' house, because F that asshole and every other jerk who thought HIV AIDS wasn't worth researching because it was punishment for being gay. It really is. I didn't really understand the gravity of the situation and the massive failures to act due to stigma until I watched the film and the band played on. I highly recommend you watch it if you have any curiosity about the subject. In 1952, Dr. Virginia Opgar developed a quick, easy 5-point test that summarizes health of newborns and determine those needing emergency assistance. The Opgar score is now given to practically every newborn and helps save countless young lives and reduce infant mortality. Fun fact, I edited her Wikipedia page to include her cause of death. I was in a summer program about women's history, and one morning we were asked to edit a famous woman's wiki page to contribute to more accurate and full info about their lives, because that's not a thing that many people are invested in. So if you get to the part where she died of cirrhosis, that was me. Edit. Thanks for the awards and karma. I did not expect to wake up and see that. Nellie Bly. She was a 1890s journalist who was given an assignment to investigate the women's lunatic asylum on Blackwell's Island due to accusations of the mistreatment of patients. She got in there by faking insanity and getting herself committed to the asylum, and when she was finally released, she ran an expose in the New York World called 10 Days in a Madhouse that exposed the awful treatment of patients inside the asylum. This was considered a revolution in investigative journalism. Also, she read Around the World in 80 Days, basically decided she could do better, and went around the world in 72 days. She was also an inventor, and was one of the primary journalists to cover the suffragette movement. She's one of my favorite historical figures who doesn't get enough attention. Edit. Wow. Thank you for the awards and upvotes. I am grateful and glad to see all the positive comments. Frances Oldham Kelly. She stopped thalidomide from getting widespread use in North America, and saved countless children from life-altering birth defects. Edit. Kelsey, not Kelly. This is so cool. I had a high school English teacher who was a thalidomide baby. She was very traditionally beautiful, but her right arm was tiny with only 3 fingers. Not that it ever slowed her down. She was right-handed and wrote with the 3-fingered hand. She was and still is one of the most extraordinary, outgoing, dynamic, talented and intelligent people I've ever met. She made a massive impact on so many students in her life. Edit. By the way, I don't mean to diminish Frances Oldham Kelly's impact just because my teacher was one of the more fortunate thalidomide victims. I'm sure my teacher would be the first to sing Kelly's praises from the rooftops. I know this is cliché, but you should think about sending that teacher a message, and letting her know how much she is appreciated. That's a wonderful recommendation. I'm friends with her on Facebook and correspond with her often, and she's a highly lauded person in the community where I grew up. But regardless, it's always nice to reiterate that appreciation every little bit is well deserved for both her and less appreciated educators. Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha. She's the Dean of Medicine at Hurley Children's Hospital in Flint, MI. She saw that children were having elevated lead levels, ELs, outside the normal range. She contacted the Genesee Department of Health, who at first dismissed her claim, then sent her obfuscated data to make it look like the ELs were completely within normal trends. She grew frustrated at this, so she called a team of epidemiologists from UVA, her alma mater, to find the source of the lead. Lo and behold, she found that the water in multiple zip codes was contaminated with lead. She informed the Genesee Department of Health again, who brushed her off. She then said duck it and held a major press conference where she announced on air that the water in Flint wasn't safe and to come to the hospital to get your child tested and to pick up supplies of water and liquid infant formula. If she saved thousands of children from the permanent effects of lead poisoning. Edit 1. Thanks for the awards. Edit 2. It was VT, not UVA. Apologies to all the VT alumni who DM'd me about it. Marie Tharp. She created the first map of the ocean floor, which led to the discovery of tectonic plates and the theory of continental drift. Inga Lehmann was a Danish seismologist. She discovered P waves, waves that reflect off of the inner core, confirming that the Earth has a solid inner core and a liquid outer core. Dr. Georgiana Seeger-Jones. Dr. Jones single-handedly organized the field of gynecological endocrinology. While at Johns Hopkins with her husband, Dr. Howard Jones, and Drs. Roberts and Steptoe, she devised the hypothesis of follicular hyperstimulation, which produced more than one egg per cycle. Her later discoveries led to increases in viability of in vitro fertilization. Per Wikipedia, as a resident at Johns Hopkins, she discovered that the pregnancy hormone HCG was manufactured by the placenta, not the pituitary gland as originally thought. This discovery led to the development of many of the early over-the-counter pregnancy test kits currently available. On 1949, Jones made the first description of luteal phase dysfunction, and is credited to be the first in using progesterone to treat women with a history of miscarriages, thus allowing many of them to not only conceive, but to deliver healthy babies. She also served as a dean of the College of Pontifical Sciences, advising the Vatican of matters of gynecology and conception. Her husband always said she's the smarter one. She was also a great friend. The Allied codebreakers at places like Bletchley Park during World War II. They worked incredibly long, tedious, and stressful hours and were a major contributor to the war effort and military intelligence, but their work didn't even receive official recognition from the British government until 2009, 64 years after the war ended. Hey, that was my granny. She loved giving talks about it. Can you pass on a story from her? That must have been interesting work time. Not the person you were talking to, but I have a story you might enjoy. A few years ago I visited Bletchley. They have a replica of one of Turing's bombs built in current time, and they have a guy who gives a presentation and show how the bomb bay works and how it was operated. This guy told us that once they were visited by a family whose grandma was one of the young women who operated the bombs in World War II. She sat in her wheelchair in front row paying enormous attention at the demonstration. The guy said that he expected that she would jump at any minute and call him on something he was doing wrong. In the end of the presentation she smiled and said, "Well done, young man. That is exactly how we did it." And the guy felt that he could finally breathe smile. Daphne Oram, first ever composer to produce electronic sound. She pioneered electronic music and laid the path for music today. She even wrote a piece called Still Point that she was never able to perform live because of sexism by her peers, and she never heard it live before she died. But it was performed for the first time in 2018 using a replica of a machine Daphne had created to electronically manipulate a live orchestra. Also her colleague Delia Derbyshire, although I think Derbyshire probably gets more recognition than Oram. Delia Derbyshire, I recognized her name. She basically created the original title music for 1960s Doctor Who, but was not credited for it then, because she electronically rearranged an existing piece of music. Yes. But when the original composer, Ron Grainer, heard her amazing arrangement for the first time, he famously asked, "Gosh, did I really write that?" I've just did a quick check on Wikipedia. Grainer actually didn't deny her contribution and tried to get her credited as a co-composer, but BBC then had some weird policy that didn't permit such things. Oh yeah, his comment was definitely an admiration. The whole process of precisely splicing together the strands of tape and using recorded and/or electronic sounds to create music was really revolutionary at the time. Most of it was coming out of just a few places, one being the BBC Radiophonic Workshop where she worked. Bessie Coleman. She was a black woman who wanted to learn to fly. No one would teach her. She learned that the French would, however, so she moved to France, learned French and how to fly. Then she came back to the States and taught whoever wanted to learn. She was alive same time as Amelia Earhart and got no recognition at the time. I was going to put her, I'm glad someone did. She was a huge part of African Americans getting into flight. She played not only a role for females but for African Americans during the early days of aviation, to be able to fly and get into the aviation field. Claudette Colvin was the person who refused to get up from her bus seat during the Jim Crows in America. But she was a young woman who was pregnant out of wedlock at the time, and the black leaders decided she was not a good image of an activist. So they handpicked Rosa Parks to do the same. Yep, Rosa was a great lady, but this girl was the first, and someone needs to write a Hollywood blockbuster to correct the misinformation. Drunk History did feature her. Even with Rosa, History tends to portray her as a woman who was just tired and spontaneously decided not to go to the back of the bus or give her seat to a white person. She was already a civil rights activist. She knew what she was doing. Yeah, I was literally told that she had a long day, her feet hurt, and she was in no kind of mood, so she said no and thus became an icon. In school took 15 years before I heard any differently, all the way in college, and only because the class discussion went way off topic from discussing the Ottoman slave trade.